I'm a commuter. I pass by the same landmarks and historical places every single day, and I don't even know it. Well, back up. I was a commuter before COVID. The alarm would blare at 5 a.m. and I would reach over in a haze to hit snooze just so I could get a couple precious seconds of extra sleep. By 6:45 a.m., I'd be headed to the metro for my trip to DC. One of my favorite parts of the metro ride is crossing the bridge into the city. A few times, if I was lucky, I could catch a plane roaring right over me, headed either to some unknown destination in the clouds or coming in for a landing at National Airport. I've got a weird fascination with planes. I've got a pretty healthy flying phobia, but I love to look at them. Sometimes my mind works in weird ways. The planes dip so low when they descend and climb so steeply when they ascend. More than once while I crossed over the Potomac, I wondered if there had ever been an accident at National Airport. As it turns out, there was a pretty notable accident at National Airport in 1982, the crash of Air Florida Flight 90. Air Florida was a carrier based out of Miami through the 1970s and 1980s. It began as an intrastate operation, but expanded to the East Coast and eventually international destinations. On the afternoon of January 30th, 1982, Air Florida Flight 90 was scheduled to fly from Washington, D.C. to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with a stop in Tampa. The plane was supposed to depart at 2:15 p.m., but takeoff was delayed due to heavy snowfall in the area. The airport closed from approximately 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., so Flight 90's departure was delayed by about an hour and 45 minutes. During that time, American Airlines personnel were de-icing the aircraft. The National Transportation Safety Board report said that the de-icing process used was inconsistent with recommended practices, so the plane was not de-iced properly. In fact, the plane had visible snow on the wings and the fuselage at the time of takeoff. The safety board also noted that the captain and the first officer did not inspect the outside of the plane before leaving the gate. This oversight was the first of many from the crew that contributed to the accident. The crew continued to make mistakes throughout the taxiing process. The report continued, the flight crew's failure to turn on engine anti-ice was a direct cause of the accident, and suggested that the accident may have been avoided had the crew turned it on. The report also notes that the plane's proximity to another aircraft while taxiing turned the snow on the plane to slush and then froze in critical areas. The instruments were not working correctly, which the first officer noted, but the captain brushed him off. Through all of this, I can't help but wonder what the 79 passengers aboard were thinking. They had been boarded between 2 and 2:30 p.m. They had been stuck on the plane for close to 2 hours. Were they nervous to fly in these conditions or just dreaming about the sunny weather that awaited them in Florida? Joe Stiley, one of the survivors, was an experienced pilot. In an ABC News article following the crash, he said he knew something was not right while the plane hurtled down the runway. Quote, "You could see out one side, but not really the other side. I wanted out in the worst way." The plane took off and struggled to maintain altitude. One eyewitness, a driver on the 14th Street Bridge that day, stated that the plane's nose was up and the tail was down. The right wing hit the bridge span first as the plane descended, leaving a trail of debris. The rest of the plane slammed into the west side of the bridge and sank into 25 to 30 feet of water between the 14th Street Bridge and the George Mason Memorial Bridge. The point of impact was only 4,500 feet from the end of the runway. In all, there were 5 survivors: Joe Stiley, his co-worker Nikki Felch, flight attendant Kelly Duncan, Priscilla Tirado, and Bert Hamilton. Duncan was only 22 at the time of the crash. According to a New York Times Magazine article, after hours of delays when the plane was finally ready to push off, she took her seat as required at the back of the plane. No one from the front of the plane survived. In an interview after the crash, Duncan said, "My next feeling was that I was just floating through white and I felt like I was dying, and I just thought, I'm not really ready to die." She, along with Stiley and Hamilton, were rescued from a lifeline thrown from a helicopter. One bystander, Lenny Skutnik, was able to rescue Priscilla Tirado from the icy waters after the rescue helicopter's failed attempt to tow her to shore. Felch was lifted out of the water from the rescue personnel aboard the helicopter. The temperature of the river that day was only 34 degrees Fahrenheit. For comparison, the temperature of the water the night the Titanic sank was 28 degrees. The water in the Potomac that day was only 6 degrees warmer. Initially, there was a sixth survivor that day, 46-year-old Arlen D. Williams, Jr. Williams was trapped in his seat in the partially submerged rear section of the plane by a jammed seat belt. Though the helicopter's lifeline came to him several times, he passed it to other survivors. When all the other survivors had been rescued, the helicopter went back for him. However, he was gone. He had slipped under the water. The coroner determined that he had drowned, and he was the only victim of the crash to do so. In 1985, the 14th Street Bridge was renamed the Arlen D. Williams, Jr. Memorial Bridge in his honor. To me, that bridge was always the 14th Street Bridge. I never knew that it actually had a name until now, or that it was named after an incredible man who gave his life so selflessly only a few feet from where thousands of commuters cross into DC every day. There are no markers or plaques commemorating him. I can't even recall seeing any other name for the bridge other than 14th Street. Though I wish there was more recognition of the bridge's true name, I'm grateful I know it now. At least the next time I commute into the city, whenever that is, I can reflect on his bravery instead of impending disaster.